How's it going, everybody? So, if you guys are back, you know what this is. Capstan Blue. While reading The Hobbit, we had to upgrade to the Gandalf Cobb this time because absolutely last time was way too short of a smoke for us to really get anywhere within The Hobbit. So we didn't get very far, but maybe we'll get a little further this time. Sitting here, nice drink. A little bourbon and Coke. Never a bad thing to go along with it too. Cheers. Man, BT makes a great mixer. I'm probably gonna piss some people off with that. All right, let's get into it. I had honestly so much fun. I've just been thinking about it since the last time we did this. We need to make it a lot further. I think we're down here. So we'll say, carefully, carefully, he said. It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofur, Bombur, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur on top of him. For one thing, Bombur was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. Now that we're all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the peg. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, is for me. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry jam and apple tart, said Bifur. And mince pies and cheese, said Bofur. And pork pie and salad, said Bombur. And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind, called the other dwarves through the door. Put on a few eggs there, there's a good fellow, Gandalf called after him, as the hobbit stumbled off to the pantries. And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larder as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles, dishes, and knives, and forks, and glasses, and plates, and spoons, and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confusticate and bebothered these dwarves, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if all this was perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will stay for supper," he said in the politest, unimpressing tone. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after. We shan't get through the business until late, and we must have some music first. Now clear out." Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of everything. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top, with one hand, while the Hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. There we go. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in boiling bowl. Pound them up with thumping pole. And when you're finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the Hobbit was turning around and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went. Up the chimney or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or around and around the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. He sent a smaller smoke ring. Pop. He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke rings would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Keely and Feely rushed for their bags and brought back fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from down the hall. Bifer and Bofer went out too, and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back to the viols as big as them, with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp. And when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one, then the other, began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, We must away ere break of day to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, and hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient kings and elvish lords, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung. The dragon fire in twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break a day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. There lay they long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. Then dragon's ear, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, the dwarves they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away or break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the Hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hand and cunning, and by magic moving through him. A fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up in him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly, in the woods beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably someone lighting a firewood, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain, Mr. Baggins, Bag End, Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar and not come out again until the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he had guessed both halves of the Hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in this house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and, worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, and policy, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to all of us. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves, I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely for this instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a brief explanation. Let's get this all tapped out, packed back down. Much, much better bowl. If you guys made it this far, just let me know. I feel like every time I read or reread something from Tolkien, I always pick up on something different. Let's see where we were. This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath without telling any of us anything that we did not already know. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At "may never return," he began to feel sick, a shriek coming up from inside, and very soon it burst out, like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprung up, knocking over tables. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for some time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf, as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit. Even the old Took's great-granduncle, Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a normal horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of Greenfields and knocked their king Golfimble's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in that way the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same time. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendants was receiving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard. Gloin speaking. Humph. Or some kind of snort, or less like that. Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that and a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if I had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure that we had the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looked more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure that you've come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of east and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great uncle once, Bull Roar Took, and yes, but that was a long time ago, said Gloin. I was talking about you, and I assure you there is a mark on your door, the usual one in trade, or used to be. Burglar. Wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it usually reads. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of sorts in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he arranged for a meeting here Wednesday tea time. Of course there's a mark, sang Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man, or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair. What we got going on here? I have this. Time for a little bit of a cleaning. When Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask questions, he turned and frowned at him and struck out a bushy eyebrow till Bilbo shut his mouth tight as a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough. Let's see here. Let's get a little tap out here. I think the top part of our bowl is pretty thoroughly ashed out at this point. We'll start a bowl counter. I think this is, we'll count this as bowl 2. Much better. If I say he's a burglar he is, or he will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me for this. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little light on this. On the table in the light of the big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. This was made by Thor, your grandfather, Thorin, he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questioning. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath, where the great dragons bred. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrive there. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes. That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of this book, and you'll see that they still have many runes. It may have been secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it's secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it's too small. 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk abreast, says the runes. But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favorite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, sang Gandalf, but in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door, which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with this map went a key. A small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung around his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far, we had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east as quiet and careful as we could as far as Long Lake. After that, the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But none of us liked the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard. Not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in the neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far away and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Thorin, supposing the burglar expert gives us some idea or suggestion. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, he said, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragons and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our song? And haven't you been talking all this time for hours? All the same. I should like it all plain and clear. He obstinately put on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off of him. and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thor's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to the mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old, but now they mined and tunneled, and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south. And they were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountains. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillfully most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves, although those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for fun of it, not to speak the most marvelous and magical toys, the likes of which is not found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewelry, you know, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a loose scale on their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north, and in these days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smog. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and pine trees on the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on top of the mountain and spout flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were alarming. The dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was a dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam, and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them, and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate, and routed all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. After that, there were no dwarves left alive. Ooh. Well, we'll have to relight back up here. But One thing I love showing, because some of these have some great artwork, is the hill, Hobbiton across the water. Some great stuff. This right here, and we'll light back up here. Looks like we're ashing this bowl down pretty quick. And he took all their wealth for himself. Probably for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it up, all up in a great heap far inside, and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined, and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain. But I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smog, and there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they had gotten away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that, we went away, and we have had to earn our livings the best we could, up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now when I will allow, we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Here Thorin stroked the gold chain round his neck. We still mean to get it back and to bring our curses home to Smog, if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get a hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather, Thorin, was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the goblin. Curse his name. Yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave this to me, to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and way of handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to go to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of the most unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. How he got there, I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If you could all be collected again from the four corners of the world, the one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. Alright guys, I think that's going to be it for this second reading. It has been awesome. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you guys are all enjoying hanging out and getting through The Hobbit. We are officially 2 bowls down with the Capstan Blue. This one much larger than the first. And we will see how many bowls it takes to get through The Hobbit. And yeah, that's about it. If you guys enjoyed the video, please comment, like, and subscribe down below, and I'll see you all in the next video.